So just to recap, I think you have a very fair idea in terms of how level 4 qualification in the units have been put together. So if I have to just bring this in the front, this is a qualification that we are covering at this moment. The idea of having some of these different modules and units that you are studying at level 4 is to try and build some sort of a foundation for the basics of some of the functions that you get to see in businesses and organizations. So we started off with a unit called Business Environment, which was all about understanding in which environment the businesses operate, what are the factors internally and externally which affect the business. We looked at some of the government policies, legislation. So we looked at a lot of frameworks which were to do with SWOT, PESTEL, Potter's forces model, and a couple of other things which were related to giving you an overview of how finances, sales, marketing, operation actually work within the business environment. Okay. Then we looked at the unit which is communication skills, and we then kind of went into understanding when you work within organization or businesses, one of the key skills which you need to be able to develop is communication, and there are different forms of communication that we looked at in that unit. So there are methods, there are different forms, formal, informal, verbal, written communication. We also looked at the role of digital communication. We looked at what types of communication techniques and models can be used, from a point of view of, understanding sometimes the organizational context and where and which appropriate model actually works. And then we also looked at resources, and within those resources, we studied human resource, which is people in organization. And again, all the factors which basically meant that, we were looking at understanding, teamwork, leadership, some of the theories related to leadership, styles of leadership. And then we, after that, went into covering finance for managers, which is one of the optional units here. And the finance for managers essentially looked at, the accounting and financial aspects involved in, working within the business in terms of operations. So we looked at basic elements of, financial structures like the balance sheet, the profit and loss account. We looked at various types of, ratios. We looked at how financing and budgeting is done. What and how does the clear idea in this particular unit was not to understand the basic structures of financial statements in detail, but the overarching objective was to understand, how finance and finance-related information helps the managers in making decisions. So how finance statements, how they're read, what is the utility of these statements, and when they are prepared at various levels, how does it help the managers and the the leaders to be able to take decisions which are effective and in the long run more productive and profitable for the organization. Now we are going to a unit which is going to be specifically discussing the role of resources in businesses or in organizations. And this particular unit is a mandatory unit, and the detailed text of this unit is which I opened up on your left, on my left hand side. It will be on your right hand side, I think. Okay. So here, the objective of studying resources in particular is there are different types of resources which I mentioned earlier. You have your financial resources, physical resources. You have IT, which is technological resources. You have humans or people, which is classified as human resources. And here the idea is in this particular unit to study resources which make up the organization, and the overall objective of studying how they are used, what is the importance of some of the resources, how they are evaluated in terms of when you make a business plan or when the business is expanding, how do you kind of plan for expansion on the physical resources, administrative resources. And in particular, we will also look at how human resource planning is done. That means if you're expanding a business or if there's a new position or a vacancy being created, so how does the HR department actually look at planning within that context? And last but not the least, we will look at some of the tools and techniques that are used to evaluate, benchmark, and monitor the progress of these resources, whether it's in terms of productivity, efficiency, or in terms of basic viability of these resources, helping to further the organizational objective. So the whole objective of studying this particular unit is to bring all the knowledge that we have seen in terms of resources into 4 different learning outcomes. And in the first one, we are going to study just the general bit, which is coming across from business environment, which talks about the external effects of external influence and effects of resources within the organization. It could be people, it could be economy, the exchange rate, for example, in the economy, currency fluctuations, and how do they kind of change the position of an organization in terms of its buying power, in terms of the physical resources and other things. The second learning outcome is clearly related to studying physical resources, which talks about basic things like how do organizations put in some of the systems that we have seen, the Six Sigma, the just-in-time systems, the stock control systems, or systems which are put in place from a physical aspect to make the operations of the organization much more efficient, robust, and obviously in some cases lean, mean, but still functional. The third learning outcome is related to human resources. That means we are going to study specifically how human resources, HRP as a phrase that we will use time and again, human resources planning is done. And again, what types of things are included in the human resource planning is something that we will look at. And last but not least, we're looking at the parameters, tools and techniques to kind of evaluate the performance of these resources.
Okay.
So this is where the unit will actually kind of cover 4 different aspects. So it will cover HR planning, it will cover organizational planning, it will cover operational planning, and last but not the least, it will kind of the overarching objective from learning outcome 1 will look at understanding the effects of environment, competitors, marketplace, demand and supply on the resources within the organization, the effects of those factors on the resources within the organization. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So this is quite an interesting unit in the sense is that it kind of is the only module at level 4 which borrows content or key learning outcomes from a lot of different units that you have studied. It does not mean that you are going to be looking at cross-referencing a lot of work that you do in other units for assignment, but from an overarching perspective of understanding how and what affects organization from a holistic view. When we look at resources, budgets, finances, physical infrastructure, this will give you that understanding.
Okay.
And when I typically start with this particular unit, the closest example that I kind of give, which I'm going to share with you, in order to understand, why is this unit important, is to look at maybe an example of an organization looking at moving premises or moving offices, right? Now, could you think of reasons why an organization would move premises, or in this case, say, for example, an office from, say, London to Birmingham?
It's mainly to do with costs and resources. If they're looking to save money, then they can move premises, because where an organisation is based could cost them more than where they were to move to. They could find somewhere that will cost them a lot less.
That's absolutely correct. So one of the points that you've absolutely nailed it is in terms of looking at cost savings and maybe better utilization or rationalization of resources that it might do in the London office, which have become kind of non-viable to sustain, and they then start looking at other options to kind of mitigate those things. What could be the other reason? So basically the point coming out of that, which you've explained quite well, is cost and resources. So you've covered costs, which is financial, from one of the aspects, that's one factor. And when you look at resources, it could be that when it is looking to move, from a premises in London to a premise in, say, any other big city like Birmingham, it might be to do with the fact that the same cost, which is a factor that you picked up, relates to the fact that it will help them get into a larger space as compared to what they have in Birmingham. So cost savings, but also allowing them to move to a bigger premise because they might be expanding, or it might be because they're expanding to bring in, more staff on board, and so they need bigger space, which might not be feasible in a premise in London that they have. What are the other? What could be one or two other reasons that you can think of would be important, or looking at why they would want to move the office location?
It could be to do with their long-term plans. They might want to expand, like, their organisation, and it could be part of the business plan.
Okay, that's also a valid point. So in this case, what I would look at is, I would club the reason of, say, flexible working, which they want to kind of provide maybe for their employees, to also looking at expansion in terms of, maybe in kind of expanding their operations. Yeah?
Yeah.
So I agree with that. Any other factor that you can think of? It could be also that they decide to move is that some of the resources that they would need, say for the production of, as raw material for the production of the final product, or maybe if it's intangible, then it could be the brains or, the intellectual, property in terms of human resources, which is what might be applicable or available in other regions, which they are moving to closer, to try and tap that resource into for the business.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. In some cases, it could be, so what we've looked at is, we've looked at costs, we've looked at financial resources, which means office environment and stuff. We've also looked at the other reason, which is HR, for example. That means the kind of people they want to employ. Like when you look at manufacturing of cars, most of the factories and setups are, expanding in and around the Midlands, the Northeast towards Sunderland and Newcastle, isn't it? Or towards Derby in particular. These are the 3 or 4, hotbeds where they say that if you are to invest into a manufacturing facility, you will be able to find the skilled manpower which will be available, in the near vicinity, from a point of view of recruitment, isn't it?
Yeah.
And in some cases, it could also be because of technological reasons, right? We might move from one office location to a different office location because there might be better connectivity, fiber, or, from a technological standpoint of view, it could be that they are moving to a location wherein, because the company has, or the organization has, a lot of international travel. So it is moving to a location closer to where it is possible for them and their staff to have international links because of aviation. So, for example, airports.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these are various factors why, and if you plan this, so what we've done is, we can go on, there will be other factors as well. But let's look at, if we have found out these factors, sometimes the decision taken by the management to look at relocation, so these are the factors why they take the decision. But when we look at the whole process of relocation of the office, there are lots of these things which will be put into motion, isn't it? Things like, they'll have to do human resources planning. They'll have to look at the new offices and premises in terms of, physical infrastructure, furnishing it. They will look at it from a point of view of project management. That means before they move everything lock, stock and barrel from one premise to the other, a huge amount of planning needs to be done so that the whole operation or the process can flow seamlessly from being organized and functional at one location to the other location.
Yeah.
Are you with me on that so far?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is a lot of proper system and systematic work which has to be done before the whole process of relocation can start. And when you understand this as a project and understand this as an objective, if you are supposed to carry that out, you in turn will then depend on a lot of different colleagues and look at taking into account a lot of different parameters which will pose challenges when you look at relocation. And if you look at from that point of view and you undertake that particular thinking, then you can think of this particular unit, because what you're managing at the end of the day, or looking at project management, project managing at the end of the day, is nothing but the relocation of different types of resources from one location to the other, which will essentially involve very less, or very, in the event, involve very less disruption for a particular business.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So now what we will do is, today what I'm going to do is that I am going to basically look at, from the 4 learning outcomes, we will pick up learning outcome 3. Not 2, learning outcome 3.
Okay.
Today to discuss. Is that okay? This is something, the reason why I want to do this is because I think when we look at the last unit that we have covered, in particular people in organization, that unit, and some bits that we're going to look at in additional to human resources and HRM that we've studied in people management, people in organization, things like teamwork, themes like leadership, motivation, are topics that are going to be are fresh with you, and we'll be able to cover them here from a different aspect of human resources planning. Okay?
Okay. Okay.
So the bits that I'm going to try and cover in the learning outcome 3 today, as you can see on this screen, is this bit, which is human resource planning in particular. This is the topic that we are going to cover today, from here till here. I'm not going to cover the motivational theories today and the reward system, is because this is something we'll pick up next week. And I will send you some handout and a small presentation which just covers motivational theories, so that you are able to just go through it, because this is not going to be something new. We have covered some of this in tandem with the leadership styles and the motivation theories required when you manage remote teams or you work within teams.
Okay.
Okay, so brilliant. Let's start with, so what I'm going to do is just start off with this particular presentation, which is visible, and enlarge the slide slightly. So basically looking at, to cover this particular learning outcome and the parts in this, what I'm going to look at is the role of human resources in particular, how goals are set by HR, and then what is the correlation between organizational performance and human resources management or human resources planning. Okay. Now stop me where obviously you don't understand anything, or obviously if there are additional questions. Now I think overarchingly, if we look at a few things, some things that we look at is what are the responsibilities which the HR in particular, or human resources. Let's not look at the department, but human resource as a as a resource has within the organization. Now, when we look at that, there are a couple of things which come to mind. First things first that we look at is that we basically look at things like, there are lots of employees in the organization, and when they are in the organization, the HR actually sets goals, or sets a job description for these employees to start working on basic remit of why they have been employed. So here what we do get to see is that before the HR starts to review, and before the HR actually starts to benchmark performance of employees, they basically look at creating something called a job description. And when they look at job description, the idea is to try and employ those set of people within the organization which either bring some sort of an experience from background, or are able to align immediately with the organizational objectives, so that overall the performance and the achievement of goals and objectives is in line with what the management expectation is. So here in the case of human resources, what they do is, even before they put out a job advert, or even before they start to recruit people into the organization, they basically start the process of something called human resources planning, which is HRP. And this human resources planning is the similar mathematics that you and me do, or everybody does on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, from a point of view of finance. When you manage your resources, is that you have a holiday coming up in July, what you're going to be looking at doing is you're going to be micromanaging your finances from a point of view of making sure that you have enough finances available to book flights, tickets, hotels when you are looking at traveling in July. So similarly, human resources planning is basically nothing but a function wherein they start to look at the idea of planning what resources, how many resources, and which type of resources are required to be able to achieve those objectives which are going to be set out by the management in the new financial year. Say, for example, the new financial year. Okay. Are we okay with that so far?
Yeah.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi, Phil, are you there?
Yeah.
Hello?
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 Hi, Phil, are you there?
Hello? Hello?